Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. I'm the Reverend Monica Dobbins, the assistant minister of this congregation, and if it seems like I'm excited to be up here, it's because I am. I love this church. I love being here on Sunday morning, and I love to see every one of you. If you're visiting with us this morning, you are our honored guest, and I especially welcome you on behalf of the ministry and the membership of the congregation. I invite you to stop by the welcome table just outside this door in our fellowship hall after service. Have a cup of coffee, let us get to know you, and you can get to know us a little better too. Our service opens every Sunday morning with the lighting of the flaming chalice. This symbol is shared by Unitarian Universalist congregations around the world as a symbol of our common faith. We light it now. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This we do covenant with each other. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and let us sing together number 271. My friends, it's been a pretty awful week for those of us who are not male. I could not even watch the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. It was too much. It was just too much. It brought back in sharp relief all the times when it was my word against his, or would have been, had I believed it would have made a difference to say something. Does that feel like a vulnerable admission on my part? It shouldn't. Not when I heard from so many of my friends, from so many of you, what it was bringing up for you. There is hardly a woman or non-binary person alive who has not been sexually harassed, assaulted, or both. I want to make space for that hurt this morning and invite our beloved men to bear witness to what we walk around with every day. Bear witness to what we may never have told you, to what we have hidden away in shame or in grief, to what is easier to forget than to speak aloud. Our ancestor Audre Lorde gives us courage with these words. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. We believe survivors. Say it with me. We believe survivors. 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 Yes, we do. Goddess of justice, strengthen your people. Soothe the hearts of those who have been wronged and clothe them with power. Bring them swift justice. Move the hearts of men that they may see what is hidden, that they may lift us up, and restore all people to wholeness in the divine image. Restore this world to beauty. Restore our hearts to love. Let us sit together in silence. Restore this world to beauty. Restore our hearts to love. Blessed be. Turning now to the topic for today, I bring you these words from my colleague, the Reverend Sarah Gibb Millspaugh. Religion is as much about faith in humanity as it is about faith in deity. And many of us will find that over and over, our faith in humanity gets tested. We are immersed in a culture that's deeply corrupted by selfishness, greed, and oppression-born privilege and fear. It's all too easy for us to justify the dehumanization, ostracization, suffering, and death of others. It's all too easy for us to devalue some humans' lives and feel somehow like we're still good, upstanding, moral people. Religion at its best asks us to do better than this, to rise above the selfishness and status-seeking, the othering and xenophobia that comes so easily to us. Religion at its best, and our Unitarian Universalist faith, calls us to honor that which is sacred in each person, even those we might hate, even those who we find disgusting. It impels us to accept on faith that there is a sacred spark, a worthy spark in every person. This can sound mundane, but it's very radical, revolutionary even. Each person sacred, each person worthy. Accepting this on faith changes how we live. In this time when so many of us live in fear of a dehumanizing political regime, let us renew our pledge to live out those sacred and humane teachings that draw us toward compassion, love, and justice in ever-widening circles of care.
Transylvania to old Boston's hallowed halls, we
Well, once again, welcome on this Sunday morning, and choir, thank you for the assertively Unitarian Universalist music. We appreciate it. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. Thank you. It's fantastic. Listen, this is such a busy church, and there are wonderful things going on all the time, and so I'd like to draw your attention to the announcements which are found in your order of service. Let me draw special attention to just a couple. Tomorrow night is Family Fun Night. Reverend Tom will be speaking with parents about mom shaming. Moms, what could that mean? What could that mean? I bet you have an idea. Never can be good enough, right? Always got to be a little bit better. So parents, please come bring your kids. There's food and fun and something to learn as well. Second, on October 13th, we will have a greeter usher training. If you've been greeting the doors for a long, long time, or if you have never done it before and want to learn how, please join us 9 to 11 in the morning on Saturday. It will be fun, I promise, because I'm in charge of it, and I'm going to make it fun. And finally, I would like to extend a very special welcome to our 6th and 7th graders. They are with us in worship this morning. You are our honored guests. Yes. You are always welcome in our worship space. For those who don't already know, this class of students is building their intercultural skills this year by learning about different faith traditions in our community, and will be visiting area churches, temples, and other houses of worship to learn how to be good guests and how to live in harmony in an interfaith public environment. So one of their first lessons included learning about 8 practices of welcoming that apply both to being guests in someone else's faith community and also to welcoming visitors into our own. You can find the 8 practices in your order of service. So as we now gratefully accept this morning's offering, I invite you to turn to a neighbor and take turns talking about the 8 practices of welcoming, which ones come easy to you and which ones you need a little work on. It is 2006, and the #1 title on both the New York Times and Amazon bestseller lists is a little book called The Audacity of Hope. Written by a young senator from Illinois and newly endorsed by Oprah Winfrey, it was to be the setup of something really new in American politics, a young man of color running for the highest office in the land on a platform of redefining the American dream. The book built upon themes this young man had first begun to construct at the Democratic National Convention in 2004, when he delivered these words in his keynote address. Do we participate in a politics of cynicism or a politics of hope? I'm not talking about blind optimism here, the almost willful ignorance that thinks unemployment will just go away if we don't talk about it, or the healthcare crisis will solve itself if we just ignore it. No, I'm talking about something more substantial. It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs. the hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores, the hope of a young naval lieutenant bravely patrolling the Mekong Delta, the hope of a mill worker's son who dares to defy the odds, the hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too. Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope. Listening to future President Barack Obama present us with this dare, we could almost feel the breeze of change blowing through the country. We could almost reach up and touch it. We could almost imagine hope and change gaining strength and sweeping us up and making things new. Hope and change. Or as some called it, hopey changey stuff. Remember that? Hopey changey stuff. That was Sarah Palin, Alaskan governor and Russian front porch surveyor, John McCain's running mate, and luminous shade foreshadowing Donald Trump, making fun of soon-to-be President Obama's campaign motto. How's that hopey changey stuff working out for ya? She was displaying the cynicism that Obama had warned against, which has now come to dominate our national discourse. Cynicism that wants us to believe that change is bad for us, that things will be better when we go back to the good old days, as if, for many of us, there was anything good about the good old days. I've been thinking about John McCain recently, as have many of you. He died just about a month ago of inoperable brain cancer. And from all I could see on social media, he was a liberal hero. Yes, a liberal hero. I saw many of my liberal friends singing his praises. What a great guy he was. How committed to civility and decency. How he was a consummate statesman simply because he still seemed to know where the aisle was and that it was possible to cross it without spontaneously bursting into flames. Now look, I'm not dancing on the man's grave here. I never met him. So I'm not going to malign his personality or character. That's not right. Although I can't remember many of his positions with which I enthusiastically agreed. My point is that we ought to have a higher standard for the elevation of human character than mere decency or civility. That should be the minimum standard for appearing in public life. Perhaps we've forgotten, but we should expect the finest and the best from those who would put themselves forward for public service. Not mere decency, but kindness, compassion, fair-mindedness, courage, grace. If decency is the best that we let ourselves expect, well, then it's no wonder our democracy is crumbling before our eyes. Yet we have become so starved for decent civil discourse that we have made civility into a god. A god, you say? Civility become a god? Decency become a god? The mind flinches from the idea, even though, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, a person will worship something. Have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of the heart, but it will out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. It can be easy for many of us in this room to sneer at the gods of the political right. They will sell their souls for 30 pieces of silver stamped with the Supreme Court emblem. They will sacrifice their children to the furious gods of white supremacy. They will melt their golden earrings down to fashionable market. so easy, isn't it? To tread in their land and claim that their false gods have feet of clay. But what about our gods? What about ours? Surely we humanists worship no false gods. Maybe we even allow ourselves to imagine that we worship no gods at all. But I, with Emerson, am convinced that the question is not whether we will worship gods, but what sorts of gods will we worship? To put it in the words of Bob Dylan, it may be the devil or the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. In her new book, No Other Gods, Anna Levy-Lyons reimagines each of the 10 Commandments from Hebrew Scripture in modern terms, arguing that these 10 ancient rules for living are just as potent and meaningful for our lives today as they have been for thousands of years. The second of those commandments is that humans are forbidden from making idols for themselves and from bowing down and serving idols. Levy-Lyons imagines us modern folk standing in line for hours to buy the newest iPhone or video game, burying ourselves in debt for luxury cars or homes in the right zip code, or going to great lengths to alter our physical appearances to avoid the indignities of aging, just as I did earlier this week when I got my roots touched up. She notes how, while these things aren't bad in themselves, we nevertheless imagine that we will gain extraordinary powers from owning them: youth, influence, control, even love. And she's right. It's so easy for any of us to lose perspective about the things in our lives and put things above people. But it's not just objects that can become idols for us. Anything can become an idol under 2 conditions. We have to make a sculpted image somehow in our own self-interest, and then we have to elevate the object and give up our power to it. In this way, decency can become an idol. Law and order become idols. Political parties become idols, and we let ourselves imagine that government will save us if only we can get our people elected. Being nice is a powerful idol, preventing us from addressing all kinds of injustices in the moment when they happen, convincing us that it's not nice to speak up, not nice to make a fuss or call attention. And even hope can become an idol. Latinx theologian Miguel de la Torre reminds us in his writings that hope was a primary value for the earliest Christians who, don't forget, were Jews, expecting a Messiah to arrive on earth to abolish empire and establish the justice of the reign of God. Their hope, according to de la Torre, is summarized in Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God. Somehow that hope got twisted into the idea that God blesses the righteous and punishes the wicked. Leaders under the pretense of Christian values try to argue that the poor deserve to be poor. But we know that's an illusion. It is not God, but people who withhold the money and power that can lift others out of poverty, people living in the richest nation the earth has ever seen, who use the false god of retribution to punish those unlike themselves and protect themselves from poverty. De la Torre says that he began to develop a theology of hopelessness after taking a group of mostly white middle-class students to a poor village in Mexico to learn about the living conditions there. One student reflected that even in the midst of terrible conditions, she could still see hope in the children's eyes. But de la Torre was keenly aware of the life that likely lay ahead for those kids What kind of hope could there really be for people living on the margins of human society? And why was it so hard for these privileged students to grasp the despair of that, to sit with the grief of that realization? Hope as a middle-class privilege, says De La Torre, soothes the conscience of those complicit with oppressive structures, lulling them to do nothing except look forward to a salvific future where every wrong will be righted and every tear wiped away, while numbing themselves to the pain of those oppressed, lest that pain motivate them to take radical action. Hope is possible when privilege allows for a future. Among the disenfranchised, the dispossessed, the least of the least, I discovered an ethos where hope is not apparent. Rather, it is imposed by those who might be endangered if the marginalized were to instead act. De La Torre's message to us as privileged people is not that hope is worthless, far from it. Rather, he invites us to consider how we have made an idol of hope. As Levi Lyons suggests, we have made a sculpted image of hope in our own self-interest, and we have elevated that object and given our power to it. We let hope stand in the gap between the need of the world and what we are able to accomplish with our own hands. It begs the question, isn't that what people have expected of God for centuries? Then hasn't hope indeed become our God? But we are people of faith. And what remains for us is faith. When we realize that hope has become an idol for us, what remains? When we summon the courage to take a sledgehammer to the false god of hope and sit down in its rubble and embrace hopelessness, what remains? When we are grieving the emptiness of what we hoped for, when hope seems lost, what remains? It is faith. Now, we may have baggage around the word faith, and rightly so. We may have been taught that faith is a word that means believing in things that we can't prove, believing in things that aren't real or verifiable. But on the contrary, genuine faith is a reflection of what we know beyond doubt. For theologian Paul Tillich, faith was best described as humanity's ultimate concern, being concerned about what is of ultimate value or worth. Humans, like every living being, he said, are concerned about many things, above all their very existence, such as food or shelter. But humans, in contrast to other living beings, have spiritual concerns, cognitive, aesthetic, social, political. The ultimate concern was that to which all other concerns must surrender, that thing that remains when everything else becomes unimportant, that which is unconditional, absolute, infinite. True faith, far from being belief in what isn't real, is always comfortable with doubt. In fact, intimately wedded to doubt. For without doubt, faith is brittle and crumbles under the slightest pressure. For faith to be meaningful, everything that would be admitted to our faith must endure the alchemy of doubt, must pass through the flame of reason, reduced to its kernel. This is why faith is incompatible with superstition. Tillich said that the element of uncertainty in faith cannot be removed. It must be accepted. And the element in faith which accepts this is courage. Serious doubt, he said, is confirmation of faith. It indicates the seriousness of our ultimate concern. For Tillich, authentic faith wasn't dependent on belief in a God or God. He said, religiously speaking, God transcends God's own name. This is why the use of God's name easily becomes an abuse or a blasphemy. For Tillich, even God can become an idol. That is, any God small enough to be manipulated to one's own ends is already an idol. The only God that could be real, the only God worthy of the name, cannot be apprehended by the human imagination. For this reason, Tillich was often called an atheist by his contemporaries, a charge that carried real consequences in his time. Yet he was not opposed to the idea of God, merely ruthless against idolatry and relentless in his search for genuine faith. Author Frederick Buechner tells this story about Paul Tillich. He says, whenever he went to the beach, he would pile up a mound of sand and sit on it, gazing out into the ocean, with tears running down his cheeks. One wonders what there was about it that moved him so. The beauty and power of it, the inexpressible mystery of it, the futility of all those waves endlessly flowing in and ebbing out again, or the sense that it was out of the ocean that life originally came, and that when life finally ends, it is the ocean that will still remain. Who knows? In his theology, Tillich avoided using the word God because it seemed to him too small, denoting only another being among beings. He preferred to speak instead of the ground of being, of God as that which makes being itself possible, as that because of which existence itself exists. His critics complain that he's being too metaphysical. They say they can't imagine praying to anything so abstract and remote. Maybe Tillich shared their difficulty. Maybe it was when he looked at the ocean that he caught a glimpse of the one he was praying to. Maybe what made him weep was how vast and overwhelming it was, and yet at the same time as near as the breath of it in his nostrils, as salty as his tears. In the end, faith is far superior to hope, because while hope pushes fear and doubt away, faith can hold them. Faith can hold anything that is true, joy and pain, fear and courage, doubt and certainty. Faith knows that nothing lasts forever. Happiness and sorrow turn in the cycles of nature. Powers and governments pass away. Political parties have their moment, then crumble to history. Heaven and earth themselves will fall. Faith always turns us away from what is temporal and toward what is infinite. So let us have the courage to pull down every idol which we have fashioned with our hands. Let us have the wisdom to cast aside everything that is false or fake in our lives and lift up only what is ultimate, what is real, what has passed the tests of our holy doubt. Let us be audacious enough to call ourselves people of faith. Amen. I invite you once more to rise in body or in spirit, and let us sing together. Number 20. may be seated. The closing words are by Karl Rahner. No amount of endless rationalizing, no incessant stewing of the exploring mind, no pressured tactics of spiritual dissection, none of this will reveal your secluded depths. Only when the hunting soul comes near you, with respectful openness and humble desire, with the immensity of your simple presence, shine forth with strobe light awareness. Only then can one fully respond, I believe, and rest in a laser beam of confident faith. Weren't our 6th and 7th graders gracious guests here today? They really were. Listen, don't tell them that. It makes them really self-conscious. Say, thank you for being with us today. You made it better here today. You made our worship very special. And you're part of our community, and we appreciate you. Now let's go have some coffee and conversation.